Have Gun Will Travel, Season 6, Episode 12, Man in an Hourglass, Detailed Summary. The 12th episode of Have Gun Will Travel Season 6, titled Man in an Hourglass, aired on December 1st, 1962. The episode centers on Paladin and a deeply personal request from Dr. Alan Moody, a physician who once saved Paladin's life. Moody asks Paladin to locate and safely bring back Johnny Tully, the young son of a woman Moody once loved. Johnny has disappeared into the hills because he is determined to track down the man he believes murdered his father, Sheriff Caleb Tully. What begins as a request to rescue a reckless young man soon becomes a complicated journey involving revenge, conflicting versions of the truth, a corrupt lawman, and the difficult question of whether justice can ever be separated from personal hatred. The story begins with Paladin receiving the call from Dr. Moody. Because Moody once saved Paladin's life, Paladin feels a personal obligation to repay the debt. The doctor does not ask him to kill anyone or recover money. Instead, he wants Paladin to find Johnny and bring him home before the young man destroys his own life in pursuit of revenge. This immediately establishes the central conflict of the episode. Johnny is young, emotional, and convinced that his father's death demands retaliation. He has taken to the hills to find Noah Cardiff, the man he believes responsible for the killing. Paladin understands that stopping Johnny will require much more than simply finding him. He must also convince him that revenge is not the same thing as justice. Paladin sets out to locate the young man and begins following the trail into increasingly isolated territory. The journey gives him time to consider the situation. He knows that a young man consumed by revenge can become extremely dangerous, especially when he has little experience with violence and believes that killing someone will restore his family's honor. Paladin has seen enough gunfights to understand that reality is rarely as simple as the stories people tell themselves. A person may begin with a desire for justice and end up becoming exactly the kind of violent person he originally hated. As Paladin searches for Johnny, he eventually locates the young man and discovers that Johnny is wearing or carrying the badge associated with his dead father. This detail is symbolically important. Johnny is not merely trying to avenge his father. He is trying to assume his father's identity. He wants to become the lawman his father was supposed to have been, even though he is still too young and emotionally inexperienced to understand what that responsibility means. The badge represents both his grief and his obsession. It reminds him constantly of the man he lost and the justice he believes he must deliver. Johnny's determination makes him difficult to control. He has convinced himself that Noah Cardiff is a murderer, and he believes that killing Cardiff will finally settle the matter. Paladin, however, refuses to accept Johnny's version without investigation. He understands that accusations made during grief can be unreliable. People often see events through the emotional lens of their own pain. The more Johnny talks about his father, the clearer it becomes that he has created a simple story in which his father was a heroic sheriff and Cardiff was an evil killer. Paladin knows that real life is rarely so clean. Eventually, Paladin and Johnny encounter Noah Cardiff. Cardiff has already been injured, and his condition makes the situation more complicated. Instead of immediately killing him, Paladin takes control of the situation and begins questioning him. Cardiff's version of events challenges everything Johnny believes. He claims that the circumstances surrounding Caleb Tully's death were far more complicated than the young man has been told. According to the episode's synopsis, Cardiff reveals that he was shot by a man wearing a badge, suggesting that the person Johnny believes was simply an innocent victim may not have been the heroic lawman his son remembers. This revelation is crucial because it forces Johnny to question his assumptions. For years, he has been carrying a version of his father's death that was apparently incomplete. His desire for revenge has been built on information that may not tell the entire story. Paladin recognizes the danger immediately. If Johnny kills Cardiff without learning the truth, he may spend the rest of his life believing that he committed a justified act when in reality, he may have murdered a man who was not responsible for his father's death. The episode therefore shifts from a simple manhunt into an investigation of moral responsibility. Paladin's role becomes that of mediator, detective, protector, and teacher. He must keep Johnny from killing Cardiff while also determining what really happened to Caleb Tully. As the story progresses, The audience learns that Caleb Tully was not necessarily the honorable lawman Johnny imagined. He had a reputation for brutality, and his position as sheriff gave him enormous power over the people around him. This revelation changes the emotional balance of the story. Johnny has spent his life mourning a father he believed represented justice, but the truth may be much darker. The episode uses this discovery to examine the danger of idealizing parents after their death. Children often remember parents according to their emotional importance rather than their flaws. Johnny has turned Caleb into a heroic figure because accepting the truth about his father would also mean accepting that the man he loved was capable of cruelty. That is an extremely painful realization for a young person. Paladin understands that Johnny needs to discover the truth gradually rather than simply being told that his father was a bad man. If Paladin forces the information on him, Johnny may reject it completely. Instead, Paladin allows evidence and circumstances to speak for themselves. This is another example of Paladin's unusual approach to solving problems. He does not simply impose his authority. He gives people the opportunity to reach conclusions themselves. Meanwhile, Cardiff is not completely safe. Several men are following the group, and they have their own reasons for wanting Cardiff captured or killed. The return journey, therefore, becomes dangerous. The synopsis notes that Cardiff has 4 Confederates trailing the group, making the trip back much more difficult than Paladin originally expected. This creates the physical action at the heart of the episode. Paladin must protect Johnny and Cardiff while also dealing with men who may attack them. The situation becomes particularly difficult because the 3 central characters do not completely trust one another. Johnny wants revenge. Cardiff wants to survive. Paladin wants to prevent a murder and uncover the truth. Their goals overlap only partially, forcing Paladin to maintain control of an increasingly unstable situation. The wilderness setting intensifies the tension. Far from civilization, there is little immediate assistance available. Paladin must rely on his own experience and judgment. He knows that the men following them can attack at any moment, so he carefully chooses routes, watches the terrain, and remains prepared for an ambush. Yet even with all his experience, he cannot simply eliminate every threat with a gun. Killing the men would create more complications, and Paladin understands that violence can easily produce additional violence. His objective is to get everyone back safely, while keeping Johnny from becoming a murderer. The emotional conflict between Paladin and Johnny becomes increasingly intense. Johnny cannot understand why Paladin refuses to let him kill Cardiff. From Johnny's perspective, Paladin appears to be protecting the very man responsible for his father's death. Paladin must therefore explain that justice requires evidence and fairness. Revenge, by contrast, requires only anger. This distinction becomes one of the episode's central philosophical ideas. A person seeking justice must be willing to accept facts even when those facts are painful. A person seeking revenge only needs to believe that the other person deserves to die. Johnny slowly begins recognizing the difference. The more he learns about his father, the less certain he becomes. His anger begins turning into confusion. His grief becomes mixed with disappointment. He is forced to confront the possibility that the man he wanted to avenge may not have been the hero he imagined. This emotional transformation is one of the strongest elements of the episode. Johnny begins the story believing that killing Cardiff will restore his family honor. He gradually discovers that the real challenge is accepting the truth about his father and deciding what kind of man he wants to become. Paladin serves as the example he needs. Paladin is a professional gunfighter, but he does not allow violence to define his morality. He carries a weapon because he understands the world he lives in, yet he does not believe that having the power to kill gives him the right to do so. Johnny initially sees the gun as a symbol of justice. Paladin shows him that the gun is merely a tool. What matters is the person holding it and the reason he chooses to use it. As the journey continues, the group faces increasing danger from Cardiff's pursuers. Paladin must repeatedly protect the others, demonstrating his exceptional skill and tactical intelligence. These scenes provide the action expected from a Western while still keeping the emotional story at the center. Every confrontation has greater significance because the audience understands what Johnny is struggling with. If Paladin fails, Johnny may kill Cardiff. If Johnny kills Cardiff, he may destroy his own future. If Cardiff is telling the truth, The murder would also represent a terrible injustice. Eventually, Dr. Moody's connection to the story becomes even more significant. His relationship with the young man's mother provides an emotional link to the past. Moody has cared about Johnny's family for years, and his request to Paladin is motivated by genuine concern. He does not want Johnny to become consumed by the same violence that destroyed the previous generation. The doctor's role also reinforces the theme of debts and obligations. Moody once saved Paladin's life, and now Paladin is repaying that favor by trying to save Johnny from himself. The idea of saving a life appears repeatedly throughout the episode. Moody saved Paladin physically. Paladin now attempts to save Johnny morally and emotionally. The story suggests that saving someone does not always mean protecting them from bullets. Sometimes it means preventing them from making a decision that will permanently destroy their future. The climax arrives as the truth surrounding Caleb Tully and Noah Cardiff becomes unavoidable. Johnny is finally forced to confront the reality that his father's actions were not as heroic as he believed. The revenge mission he has built his identity around begins collapsing. Instead of finding satisfaction, he finds sorrow. This is an important moment because the episode refuses to present revenge as emotionally rewarding. Even when people believe they have a legitimate reason for anger, killing rarely repairs the original loss. A dead father remains dead. A murdered enemy creates another death. Nothing truly returns to the way it was. Paladin understands this and tries to make Johnny understand it as well. The final confrontation with Cardiff and the men following him provides the physical resolution to the story. Paladin remains determined to protect Johnny while dealing with the immediate threat. The resulting action demonstrates why he has survived so many dangerous situations. He does not panic. He does not allow anger to control his decisions. He remains focused on the objective. When the danger finally passes, the emotional resolution becomes more important than the gunplay. Johnny has been forced to grow up during the journey. He has learned that the world is more complicated than the stories he has believed. Most importantly, he learns that honoring his father does not require repeating his father's mistakes. He can remember the man who raised him while still accepting the truth about his character. The episode's title,